Ever since I was younger, I was always astounded by the planets and even the solar system. When I was younger in elementary school, I did a project on all the planets, where I had to stick all of the planets together and they all like hung together in a shape. And I was always so intrigued by Saturn and its rings. My presentation today will dive into the geological history and um, we'll be learning about Saturn today. As we go forward, before we go into Saturn itself, we're going to first start off with some of its history. So, in 1511 to 1574, the ancient Greeks named Saturn after the Greek god Saturnus, who was the god of agriculture. And they just believed it was a star at that point. They didn't know it was actually a planet because they didn't really have the advanced technology at the time to know it was a planet. And then Galileo saw it through a telescope. So he did have like in the 17th century, so he did have like a better idea of it, but he still didn't really know what it was. And then in 1997, NASA sent a spacecraft called Cassini into space in 1997, and then it only arrived at Saturn in 2004. And that's when we were able to get like the best visual of Saturn, like its size, the color of it, and most importantly, we could see the interesting rings that surround Saturn. Diving into the size of Saturn. So, Saturn is the second largest planet in the solar system. The first largest is Jupiter. They are both gas giants, so they are mostly fully made of gas. Comparing to Earth, where we live, Saturn is also 10 times wider than Earth. It is also the lightest planet because it's made of hydrogen and it's just light. It's also less dense than water. Its radius is 36,184 miles compared to Earth. Earth is only 3,900 miles, so it's almost 12 times as big as Earth. Moving into the composition and what Saturn is made of, like I said in the previous slide, it's made of hydrogen and helium, which are both gases. And on the planet itself, it's a mixture of water, ice, rocky material, comets, and asteroids kind of like blended in together. And there's no specific landmass like on the planet itself. So even if humans were able to go to Saturn, you can't like park like your spaceship on the planet and walk around like how we did on the moon. You can't do that. Um, it's also made of gas and liquids, and as well as ammonia crystals. So some scientists believe that the mixture of hydrogen and helium can actually produce crystals on the planet itself, which I think is really interesting. So if we could ever in the future maybe get like a sample of that, I would really want to see what that would be like. Now, what intrigued me the most besides Saturn's rings is its moons. So it has 82 moons. It has the most moons out of any planet in the whole solar system. Um, the Enceladus is made of ice and it's 313 miles long. These are like the moons surrounding the solar system. Um, Enceladus is the smallest moon. It's 313 miles long. It's made of ice. Now, Titan, on the other hand, is Saturn's largest moon, and it's made of clouds, and it's a very dense atmosphere. It's 3,200 miles long, and this moon itself is bigger than the planet Mercury, which is pretty big. Now, both of these moons, Enceladus and Titan, have their own specific underground oceans within the planet itself. And the moons um, around Saturn that keep the rings in place, as we can see in this image, are called shepherding moons. Now, these moons orbit around the planet, but it also keeps the gravity of the rings intact. So it's what makes the rings stay together. So it's the orbit of these shepherding moons that keep the rings intact, and that's why they don't like the rings don't like crumble or like tear apart, and it's why they stay together. To me, that was pretty interesting. I didn't even know that, but the moons play a very vital role on Saturn, because if it didn't have this many moons, then it wouldn't be able to keep the orbit of the rings intact, which is what makes Saturn Saturn. Everyone knows Saturn by its rings because the rings are so visible and so profound. Diving into more information about the rings span around 170,000 miles long. Um, the rings are composed of shattered moons that have hit Saturn, as well as a mixture of asteroids and comets. Now, the temperatures shift quite a lot in the rings. So this leads to some moons being destroyed and then other moons actually being created. So there's always a constant change going around because of the temperature shifts. Now, scientists have created this chart of the 7 groups of rings, and it's in order. So D is the most recently found rings, and E at the other end is the last one that's found. But the most prominent rings that we see the most are A, B, and C, which are in the middle of the diagram, as you can see. So you can't really see the F ring and the G ring, that the most prominent rings. And when you see a picture of Saturn, you see the rings around the planet itself. Well, that's the A, B, and C ring, which I thought was really interesting. So that is why I thought I would include this diagram. Some other interesting facts about Saturn is that they have really big storms on the planet because of the mixture of hydrogen and helium, and with the collision of rocks and asteroids always hitting it. But the biggest storm is actually right at the North Pole, and it's like a hexagon shape. And it encircles a massive hurricane. So it's like a circular movement at the top of Saturn. Because of these large storms and the hurricane at the top, the planet is very, very windy. There's always movement of particles going around, asteroids and comets. You can't actually stand up on Saturn itself because, like I said earlier, there is no landmass. So it's impossible to stand on it if there's no mass, because us humans are kind of heavy. We have an atomic weight. Saturn is also the 6th planet from the sun. So it's right about in the middle-ish of the solar system. And what I thought was really interesting is that one day on Saturn is 10.7 hours on Earth. And then one Saturn year is actually 29 Earth years. So that's crazy. Compared to us on Earth, I think this is really important because this helps us visualize the orbit of Saturn and how slow it moves compared to Earth years. So when I hit 29 years old, I'm 21. Now it'll be another full year for Saturn. So we still have 7 years to go. Here's a more visual map so we can see where Saturn is. As you can tell, it's towards the middle end of the solar system, and compared to Jupiter, like I said earlier, it is the 2nd largest planet. It's also made of gas mostly. Jupiter also has rings, as you can tell, but they're not as profound and as visible. So does Uranus and Neptune. But Saturn's rings are more profound and more visual to us humans. And through the discoveries we've made, we can see that Saturn has the most visible rings. Throughout this presentation, I learned so much about Saturn. I learned about the more specifically about the rings and how the moons keep the orbit in the rings. I learned that Saturn is mostly a gas planet and that humans cannot stand on it. It is also a very windy planet with a lot of storms and hurricanes at the top, and that the planet itself has over 82 moons. So I hope that you enjoyed my presentation and that you learned something new about Saturn today, as it is one of my favorite planets, and I'm so glad I learned more about Saturn. Thank you.